Hi, I'm Nick. I'm a senior at SOTA, and I'm here with Elvin from Graduate Tacoma, and we'll be looking into a little bit into what he does here and what Graduate Tacoma is all about. Can you tell me a little bit about Graduate Tacoma and Foundation for Tacoma students and the type of work that you do?
I'd be happy to. Graduate Tacoma is the name of our community-wide movement. Ultimately, there's a vision where every student, every child really has success from cradle to career and in life. We're education-rooted foundation, so the Foundation for Tacoma Students is the organization that actually supports the movement. Right now, we're at around 350 or so community partners, big and small. And this is a cross-sector, right? So obviously, we work closest with schools, nonprofits who work with kids, but really we work with like City of Tacoma, government institutions, the financial sector, the business sector, the housing sector, and really ultimately the goal to that vision is to have the community support every single child in a way that they define. So there's a little bit of a equity, operationalization of equity that we try and focus on to make sure every kid gets exactly what they need.
Definitely. Mm-hmm. And kind of working with Next Move seems a little bit kind of indicative of how you guys are ingrained in the community.
Absolutely, absolutely. Had super positive experience with Next Move.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell me a little bit about your personal and professional journey to get where you're at now?
Yeah, personal journey. So I'm a first generation born American here. My parents are from the Philippines. They moved here in 1979. So I have a big family. We all moved basically to the Northwest, some on the East Coast, some in California and whatnot. But like the public education system kind of led me to want to be a teacher. So my experience growing up early was like, okay, this seems fun. I get to work with kids. I get to express myself and my talents, utilize that to help develop youth in the community. So I did that youth development work, nonprofit work for about 20 years now. But it wasn't until a couple years ago, most of my experiences were with the Boys and Girls Clubs. So like community center type of programs, active programs, education programs, very well-rounded. And I kind of take that into my position here with the Foundation for Tacoma Students. I'm currently the deputy director, and we do think of our work as a system of supports. So experiences like I had with the Boys and Girls Club and directly with youth help inform how we think about things systemically. Like it was a blessing to be in a position where I'm working with large groups of kids and they're looking to me as a mentor. They're looking to me to help them with resources. If I can't provide it, who do I partner with? Who do I work with? What's my social network in order to get children what they need? That's basically what we do here. And just think about cross-sector systems integration. Like how do these systems talk to each other? And realistically, how do they not talk to each other? There's a lot of systemic barriers, racist systems that continually impact and have for generations, right? So that's kind of I have the honor of working for an organization that's our core thing. How do we get rid of these barriers and eliminate all of these disparity gaps that kids like me, who are just born and raised here, first generation, don't have a whole lot of systemic knowledge of how all this works. How do we make it better for them?
Mm-hmm. And in talking about barriers, I was wondering if we could go into some of the hurdles that you've come to face along the way.
Myself personally? Yeah, I think knowledge is one. So with my parents moving here, there's certain things that they knew about American culture, how to be successful. And I think there was, at least I'll only speak for my family, there were certain pathways that led to success. Stereotypically speaking, like the healthcare, medical field, or potentially going into law, certain things that were rooted in financial success. For like my parents' generation, that was very much ingrained early. So it wasn't necessarily about how do I utilize my own strengths, my own naturally God-given talents and things like that in order to have more broad-based success. How do I feel fulfilled with the impact that I'm making within the community? So a barrier or hurdle is kind of just what is the definition of success from generation to generation kind of thing. I think a hurdle, I had a lot of blessings. I had a lot of, family support. I had a lot of like community circles that I could lean in on. But I think the limitations of, it's kind of on a technical end, like nonprofits don't financially sustain you very well. So there's a lot of like, when you're early on in your career, You're not necessarily making a whole lot of money. You're being fulfilled in many other ways, right? Like you have deep, deep ties to the community, deep relationships with the students and children that you're working with. But ultimately, like the nonprofit financial structure isn't necessarily conducive to, financial health in the long run, which is something I care deeply about. Like this work should be sustained at the same level of, in my opinion, a doctor or a lawyer. You know what I mean? There should be financial aspects to this that are beneficial in that end too, in addition to all the other benefits of doing this work.
Definitely. Could you tell us a little bit about why this work is important to you?
Yeah, I mean, the role of community is to support, in my mind, the next generation, right? Like, I don't think there is any more important work than that. And doing so in a way that's sustainable. I think when I was working directly with students, I'm a mentor and I can develop my relationship with students, but if that's not sustained for that child or that child's child, if that system of supports is kind of, always shaky, then the outcomes desired for the community can't happen. And they definitely can't be, realized for what we say minoritized communities. So like communities who struggle with poverty or communities who have systemically been not given the opportunities to succeed. That's the root of our work here. That's the root of the work I feel like I've done over the last 20 years. It feels weird to say that. But I think there is no more rewarding or important work than the work that we do here, in addition to alongside all of our partners. Mm-hmm.
Definitely, and when you're fighting against things like kind of systemic problems and systemic systems that are made to keep people from achieving what they are truly possible of, it's really important to build those systems that stand generations and are knowledgeable to everyone and not things that are hard to seek out.
100% agree.
Why is Tacoma important to you?
Tacoma's been my home for the last almost 10 years now. So I care about my home. And I think there's home means a lot of things, right? Home is family also for me. Like I said, our family is like from the Pacific Northwest. I was born and raised in this area. So I care deeply from like a home aspect. I also think about Tacoma and the spirit of collaboration that's here. I think I'm in a privileged position to be able to do this work. So what am I doing with that? Am I honoring this role? Am I honoring this position and doing right by the community that I do call home? I think there's and it's crazy. Like Tacoma, I've never worked in an area that's kind of as big. Like Tacoma is a fairly large city. It's not as big as Seattle or your bigger metropolitan areas, but it's big and resourced, right? I've never seen the level of deep relationships and deep collaboration, like even amongst systems that I have experienced here in Tacoma. Like the people that I work with here are my closest friends. And I would continue to call them family, in the family you choose kind of thing, moving forward. So it's important to me in many ways.
It's so interesting having done a couple of these interviews so far, hearing that spirit of collaboration and that uniqueness to Tacoma is like always so heavily preached about and just a ribbon that's kind of strung everywhere through this community.
100% agree. You can't fake that if you're hearing it from many different sources, right?
What advice would you give to high schoolers who are starting to graduate and think about their careers?
That is a big question. So advice for me is I guess take the time to really think about the personal strengths that each student has. And that takes a lot to do. It takes time and deliberate, me time, right? To look at what do I do really well? And I'm not talking necessarily about technical skills. Like, am I good at math? Am I good at sports? Or what are that? Those are absolutely a part of that universe. But I'm also thinking about competencies. And I did a lot of work with the Boys and Girls Clubs around social emotional learning, right? So there's other kinds of learning that are conducive to professional environments. Like, do I provide a warm welcome for the people who are around me? Can I communicate my points in many different ways, depending on the audience that is in front of me? Am I confident? There's so many other competencies and skills that each individual would bring. So my advice would be to like look at those things and build on those, because ultimately, just like the Graduate Tacoma movement, it's about success. And if you can take your strengths and skills and define your own success and find a route or a pathway that works for you, to me, that's the ultimate goal.
Could you tell us a little bit about exploring, kind of just discovering yourself in that way? Because I feel like, at least for some students, it might be a little difficult because, you know, we're giving concrete kind of markings of like, yes, I am good at math, or like, you know, I'm not that great at reading. I feel like delving into those more personal, like internal strengths is a lot harder to decipher for 100%. Especially young kids.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I think to that point, it depends on the networks that you have available to you, right? So your family might be that place where, yeah, I'm looking inside, but I need my family's guidance to like help me look in the mirror kind of thing. In other circumstances, it might be like a Boys and Girls Clubs or an organization, like a community mentor or something that can help facilitate that internal exploration. I think my ultimate vision, though, with regard to that is that the entire systems, all these systems, should allow each student, regardless of where they need most support there, to help them build their strengths and identify those things. And I think we're not there yet. You know what I mean? I think we have a system that the outcome isn't necessarily always student-centered in my mind. The outcome is maybe, you know, like I said, financial gain or help this organization do this thing. The more student-centered we are, our systems should adapt to that. They should say, oh, Elvin is good at, you know, talking to big groups. What opportunities and pathways do we bring to him so that he can achieve success? Versus having the student have to navigate all these complexities, all these barriers, in order to get to what I think our community should be seeking out is like their positive outcome. So I think we're flipped a little bit, but hopefully some of our work is changing that.
And discussing this like changing work and this changing system, what advice would you give to high schoolers who are interested in going into this work and serving their community?
We need you. that's number one. Like, we need the help, man. I'm somewhat older, 38. I'm like in the middle, but energy, man. Like it's something that is natural. You can't really like teach energy. So if you're thinking about going into like nonprofit work, energy, number one, and like understanding your strengths, I think are there. This field, if I can use it broadly, the field of nonprofit or social justice work and whatnot, it breeds, in my opinion, both of those things, energy and like bringing yourself, your whole self to the work. But it's hard. I think it's really, really slow. It's slower than anybody at least should expect, right? If there's a common goal, if we all agree that number one, racism exists, they're integrated into our barriers, it should not be this slow to fight it, right? But that's how powerful that force is. So come with the energy, come with your own strengths, define, know what those things are, and there's a place for you in this work.
And yeah, I think it's very valuable to hear that, because especially when you are considering high schoolers and kind of younger people getting into this work, like you said, they bring energy to it. The difficult part is accepting how interlaced this kind of work is and how slow it is at first, like you said. And it's definitely a lot of toil.
Yeah, agreed. We talk about resiliency a lot in social sectors, and it's thought of as like oh man, what a great strength to have. An ideal system is you don't need to be resilient, right? Like it should give you what you need, right, as you define it. So the resiliency thing, yes, you absolutely need it because of how like difficult this fight is. But ultimately, the goal should be, kids shouldn't need to be as resilient as they need to be in order to legit survive. That's not a system that works. That's not a community that, is working, if you will. You know what I'm saying? So, yeah, I think all these things tie together. It's a part of the work, for realistically speaking, but let's have a shared vision of where a community has less barriers and kids don't have to be expected to be as resilient as they absolutely are.
And then speaking on kind of putting kids in positions to succeed, what would you say to someone, say a business that's looking into hosting Next Move interns?
Do it. We've had an incredibly positive experience. So with regard to, it's kind of like the networking thing, right? There are mutual benefits, at least from my perspective, to the business and to the student and intern, right? There's experiences, cross-shared experiences that we've experienced here of like, okay, we say we want to set up our systems for a student, but if you're not working directly with students, if you're not elevating their voice, if you're not sharing experiences, then businesses or, non-youth driven spaces are going to continue to do the same things that they do, right? And those outcomes won't match. So hosting an intern is a perfect win-win, at least in my mind, because you get the experience from the business side to learn from the student, and then vice versa, right? Depending on the business and the match, right? The match matters. So if you have some kind of like common goals that the business shares with the student, hopefully the student has a well-rounded learning experience also. I don't think there's a more powerful thing in a child's life or a student's life than a caring mentor and a caring adult mentor, right? Like I think there's value to peer networks and things of that nature, but speaking more towards the adult mentorship, it's kind of like a way to look into the future a little bit, right? If there is a good match mentor to mentee, there are real deep kind of experiential things that a mentor would be able to share. If it's done in a way that centers the student, though, and not the mentor, right? If the mentor's sole purpose is to get the student or mentee what they need, it's life-changing, right? And I think similar to what I was saying with the business and the intern, any situation that I've personally been with regard to mentorship has changed my life. I am who I am because of the students that I've worked with, or my younger cousins, or my younger sister. You know what I mean? Like mentors don't have to be this formal, like, academic type of term, right? It's just somebody, a guide, if you will, right? And so that to me is life-changing for hopefully both parties.
Yeah, and I think especially when you talk about kind of investing in the youth and high school students, and specifically in the younger parts of the community, speaking, I'll say on my own behalf, but also the behalf of younger students, it's so uniquely boosting in confidence, I would say, to have an older person, depending on their age, but having a mentor basically that is not only focused on you, but actively believing in you and actively taking time out of their own day to really invest in like what you're doing and how your life is. And having that, I think, outside of your parents is something that's like truly invaluable. Yeah,
I fully agree. And to the point of the match, right? Your parents serve a certain role, right? But I think there's things that are outside of, it's like concentric circles. Like when you're so close, it's kind of hard to have some of these more difficult conversations. Or I've experienced, it's difficult to talk to your parents about certain things. If you go out one level, you're a little bit further removed, but you still understand who that person is. And a mentor in that circle potentially is able to respond in a different way that like is in line with the parents or the family or whoever it is, but just lands a little bit different.
Definitely. And it's a little, like you said, it's a little awkward hearing specific conversations from your parents. But we've definitely heard that reflected in other interviews, specifically people saying like bosses or like having peers at work, kind of reiterating the same lessons and the same things that like you need to take care and have your eggs all in a row, kind of really is good for drilling that just, I think, outside of that really close circle.
Yep. It's too real sometimes. You know what I'm saying? Like I think when you're talking to your family, it's just different, right? So hearing the same thing literally from a different source, weirdly, I don't know why that works, but it works sometimes, right? So the goal alignment needs to be there, right? Like, and the goal needs to be centered on the student. So if that's the case, it doesn't matter who you're talking to, right? That's going to help you get to where you want to go, and not me as your mentor where I think you should go. Or even, I would go as far to say, is where your parents want you to go, right? It should be student-centered. And it's again, like an honor. It's very humbling, I guess, to be in a position where you're able to talk to somebody and potentially help them with where they want to go. That's, again, life-changing for the mentor. Yeah, that is a great question, and it's multi-tiered, right? So when I was speaking towards like student-centered, where do you want to go? There's a question in my mind, I guess, that I would think should be layered in a lot of these mentor-mentee things. It's instead of like, what do you want to do? when you grow up. It's more so, how do you want to impact the world? What change do you want to make? Things of that nature, right? And there are certain skills that, depending on the answer to that, that will get you there. But again, as I was saying earlier, it's not necessarily always the technical skills as I would describe math or athletics or whatever. It's who you are, your passion, right? I do believe in a strengths-based approach, right? So if I am absolutely, if my skill is, let's say, being outgoing or being able to talk to you one-on-one and be able to speak freely kind of thing, if that's a skill, I can utilize that to impact, quote unquote, the world, right? And the world, in my mind, is you sitting right in front of me, right? I'm just talking to you right now. So that's the methodology, I guess, is center the student, understand that all skills and competencies are valuable if you ask the right question, right? And that question being, how do you want to impact the world? Then there's the aspect of access. So if you're talking about who has access to a mentor or to some kind of structure that helps that student discover those things, historically speaking, our systems are not set up to serve the furthest from opportunity, right? If you are minoritized, and I use that, if the system pushes you up to the outskirts, you will not have the systemic access to the things that other students would have. And again, I will call out specifically BIPOC students, students of color, and those impacted by poverty. So if we are thinking about, we want every single student to succeed by that definition that I'm talking about, by their own definition, then you need to target any and all efforts into those who are separate from that system, right? You need to either break down the system or understand the barriers, you know what I mean, in order to be very, very targeted. I only want to look at that demographic of students who has never had access to these types of supports or these types of mentors or facilitation methods or things like that. So our organization does do a lot of that. We're not there yet. Again, like the access and pathways are still kind of one-off, if you will. We work towards a vision where the system brings those kind of mentors or those kind of experiences directly to those students of color and those impacted by poverty. So we don't have, there is no single answer, nor, in my opinion, should there be. It should be specific and equitably designed for each student or intern. So if we're drilling down to kind of like a internship model, right? If an next move intern comes and works with us, the entire first week or two, the first part of it will be like, who are you? What do you want to do? How do you want to impact, right? Our work is so broad, and should be, that we can point to an experience and make it kind of a well-rounded learning experience for the intern. If we're not doing that, we're not doing our job as the business who is hosting an intern. And it's because we're not following through, we're not centering the intern. We're more centering, here's what I need for my organization, or I need this report done, or I need this kind of task done. It should be flipped, in my opinion, because we'll get the most bang for most win-wins in that sense. Does that answer your question? Okay.
And I guess I'd like to kind of revisit a point, a little bit more of a deviation for students, and also my own curiosity. Would you say in figuring out your future and what you're suited for, would it be passion that is guided by your skills, or should you focus on your skills in leading you towards something?
That is a great question. I've never been asked it in that regard. Oftentimes in my experience, and I keep couching that, like just from my perspective, sometimes those things are intertwined. And I'll use an example of myself. So I'm a musician. I play a number of different instruments, right? And I played in like different bands over the course of my life. The technical skill for me is like being a drummer. Like I know how to drum. Being a part of a band applies that technical skill in more of a group setting. Like now I'm learning teamwork. Now I'm learning communication. Now I'm learning how to be project manager because we got a gig in a month and we got to, do all these things to get there. Those are what I would call like professional skills, right? But I'm applying my technical talent and my passion to get to those quote unquote professional skills. So I guess I could have looked at it in both ways. Like I want to join a band because I want to practice these things. Oh, and I just so happen to be a drummer. I can do that. Or I could say, well, I'm a drummer. I want to play in a band, right? And I want to practice my passion. So I don't think there's a right answer. I think acknowledging the interconnectivity of those two things and not thinking of them in two different ways is probably the best way to go, from my perspective.
Mm-hmm. Got it. So in some sense, separating them for the sake of applying it in the sense of like being in a band or like taking it to the workplace and applying those same skills, but also not separating it to think of them as like independent pieces.
Yeah, it's not an or. It's definitely an and, right? And I would say the role of a business who's hosting an intern or the role of a mentor should be able to kind of ask questions, open-ended questions to facilitate that connectivity for the student. So if the student is thinking of it as an or, I would also say sometimes our systems make you think of it like an or, right? You can either do this or that, right? If you have kind of a situation set up where the facilitator of the internship or the mentor is kind of exploring that and be like, oh, well, have you thought about it in this way, kind of thing, potentially lead to a better outcome.
And what I'm realizing now in discussing all of this is how it's been designed so that you think of it in that way and separate these things. And in all these topics that we've discussed in this interview, finding that it's all is so interconnected and something that I think myself wouldn't have realized without coming here and talking. And I guess having a slight mentor relationship building right now.
Sure,
but
sure.
I don't know, I think it's definitely something, especially when you describe your work, of reframing it all and kind of centering it around students and communicating to them that the decisions that you are subconsciously making and kind of deciding in your head are not ones that need to be made, nor are they needing to be viewed in that sense.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it better. Yeah, that's definitely the interconnectivity. You can zoom all the way up and think about community systems. Oftentimes we think of them as silos. For a family, for a parent, they don't think of these systems as silos. They just live their life within the community. So the more siloed we conceptualize them in, we almost get what we envision. You know what I'm saying? So at least with our movement and the foundation, you have to envision it differently. And that's not hard if you have had experience with these kind of conversations with youth. Everything is connected, right? So it's the system or the mentor or the business's job, at least in my mind, to help facilitate that connectivity. Ultimately, I think you'll get a better vision of what either the student wants or what the community can do for a student. I think those things are absolutely connected.
Well, that's all the questions that I have. So thank you for giving us your time.
Absolutely.